Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Shout at the Devil, a retrospective review of the Devil May Cry series. In 2001, I was living in Phoenix, Arizona. Through some local tabletop gaming networks, I was hanging out at an apartment with some other D&D players. And of course, the nature of our conversation turned to video games, because the two hobbies usually run concurrently. Since it was the PS2 era, the latest and greatest of that system was on everyone's minds, as well as the games still being played from the PS1 years. Our host was gushing about his love of many of Capcom's titles, such as Resident Evil and Street Fighter. Having recently gotten my hands on a new for the time title that I knew was the result of a cancelled Resident Evil build, I decided to tell our host about it and let him borrow it, which he did. A week later, when I showed up for game, I asked him what he thought of it. His words still echo in the corners of my mind all these years later. The Devil Trigger mode is great. You really kick ass. Outside of that, you ain't shit. Too bad the whole game wasn't like that. That, folks, was the first review of the now legendary Devil May Cry series that I heard that didn't come from a professional game magazine. So a stark reminder that the players have a voice, and sometimes contrarian opinions, as opposed to the professional reviewers, and sometimes they just do not agree. And for some time, I began to agree with that impression. It certainly wasn't my type of game, and yet, here I am doing an episode on not only the original game, but the whole series as I have played them. Allow me to expand upon that. But first, a little history on this series. First created by Hideki Kamiya, who was known for his directing chops on the original Resident Evil 2, Beautiful Joe, and Okami. Kamiya was attempting to develop a Resident Evil 4 that was far more action focused, but Capcom disagreed with that theory. However, they did like the idea of a supernatural action game, so it was allowed to be developed further as its own game. But the games were instead of being directed by Kamiya, they were directed by Hideki Itsuno and Bingo Morihashi. And the main character was a tall, red coat wearing, white haired half demon, half human named Dante, an allusion to the poet Dante Alighieri and his renowned work, The Divine Comedy. This Dante, however, was a wisecracking dude full of attitude with guns and sword, something we got a lot of in games around the early 2000s. But while the series was a success, it has had quite a lot of ups and downs. Even the developers had their conflicts over the various games, development decisions, director flights of fancy, and even a reboot and threats of reboots. But the main series has sold 32 million titles worldwide and led to comic books, few animated features, and lots of merchandise. And that simply does not happen without having solid titles to work from. Yet these titles are not normally known for their strength of their plots. No, the plots are as paper thin as it gets. The strength of these games is focused entirely on the action. Of particular note is evolving combinations of melee combat and ranged combat, and the ease and speed at which one can be switched to the other. Plus the main characters, yes there will be multiple, are generally considered cool and or hot. The women want them, men want to be them sort of attractive. Or maybe it's the other way around. Either way, it helps the action and the sales figures having pretty people as your lead actors. But as I said, this series evolved quite a bit over its iterations and moves from the PlayStation 2 up to the PS5. However, hardly have I played all the titles in this series, but I will cover, however brief, the titles I have spent my time with. It does all begin with 2001's Devil May Cry. The plot, such as it is, revolves around Dante, who runs his own demon hunting business. Because that's what one does when one's mother and brother have been killed by demons. One day, a woman named Trish bursts in, looking to hire Dante. But Trish looks suspiciously like Dante's dead mother, and seems to know far too much about our protagonist's personal history. She puts him to the test by attacking him and destroying his shop, and when he rebuffs her, she leads him to a place called Mallet Island, where Mundus, the current demon overlord of Hell, and the one responsible for the death of his family, is trying to cross over to the human world and destroy all life. Trish leads Dante to Mallet Island and abandons him, and Dante will explore the castle section by section, fighting his way through demons that suddenly warp in via teleport circles, and will cut his way through Mundus's servants, Phantom, Griffin, Nightmare, and Nello Angelo, usually more than once. Near game's end, Trish will seemingly be killed after revealing she was a spy for Mundus. Oh, shock and surprise, say it ain't so. And Nello Angelo will be revealed to be Dante's twin brother Virgil, another Divine Comedy reference, who has been brainwashed by Mundus into serving him. Dante and Virgil's pendants, a gift from their father, are joined, and Dante claims his father's sword and is able to transform into his father Sparta's demon form. And he goes on to defeat Mundus in otherworldly combat. Dante returns to check on Trish, who has recovered but is crying, as she is a demon and Dante will have to kill her. But instead, his cool guy comforts her by saying she must be human because devils never cry. Yikes on bikes. That certainly was a line. It was a simple game, meant to be little more than a fun action title. It was an experiment to see if the game had enough muster to gain an audience. And it did, and I was among them. It was a hack and slash shoot 'em up excitement, and a great use of the PS2's processing power at a time when the system was still new and nobody really knew what the machine could do. It met with a lot of 9 out of 10 awards from Game Press. However, it also met with deserved criticism for its challenge level at the time. Underdeveloped characters and that fucking bullshit camera that was still way too much of a mix of fixed camera angles and its wildly swinging movements to try and stay center focused on the action. Despite completing the game, I felt that too often, and despite hard-won upgrades to the weapons, you were doing too little damage outside of the double trigger mode to successfully defeat the horde set against you, which I didn't enjoy. But overall, it was an unbalanced but successful video game experiment from a studio known for its great breadth of characters and franchises, some of which have fallen by the wayside in favor of its much more popular titles, which is kind of where I felt this title would go in the end. A one and done sort of game. So I was very shocked when 2003's Devil May Cry 2 arrived to a thunderous fart of a reception. Handed off to an inexperienced team, this title takes place many years after the first game, but before Devil May Cry 4, starting the problem in the series of the timeline not being in chronological order. Not that games need to be in chronological order, but it's hell on writers trying to shoehorn in lore for the series when a game developed a decade earlier but set after a more modern title immediately contradicts itself in terms of story, abilities, and characters. Devil May Cry 2 takes place on a completely different island, Vie de Marly Island, where Dante and the island's protector, a half-angel named Lucia, fight to stop a businessman named Arius from raising yet another demon lord, one named Argosax, to rule the human world. This Dante is older, wiser, and less prone to wisecracks to the point of nearly being a silent protagonist, and this game plays a lot more conservatively than its previous mix of melee and gunfights. This game is also unforgivably bland. Monster designs are lackluster, the cityscapes of the modern glass and chrome steel island setting are dull and lifeless, the upgrades and weapon unlocks are damn near pointless, and perhaps the biggest sin this game commits is the fact that the most powerful weapon in the game are your starting pistols. They never run out of ammo, they infinitely juggle enemies and interrupt their attacks, and do so much chip damage there is no point to even draw your sword. At one point, your enemies are possessed tanks and an attack helicopter. There are no fun designs or snarling demon faces on the damn things, just military hardware Dante fends off with his pistols, somehow. At one point, an entire demonic skyscraper attacks you, and all you need to do is jump its laser attacks and keep shooting. Arius is almost a secondary character to the plot, despite being the majority villain of the game. And even the demon Argosax is kind of surprised when he shows up at the end of the game to be the final battle. The developers tried to set up Lucia as Dante's new leading lady. But the poor dear is overshadowed by Dante and somehow by herself. And in all honesty, no one gave a shit about her. Her section of playing as her were essentially Dante light, with the same issues as the primary game. A lot of things went wrong behind the scenes at Capcom with this title. Shinji Mikami and Hideki Kamiya were in complete disagreement with their teams on how to handle the split between Resident Evil and Devil May Cry. The company owners didn't like the way the original team, who made Devil May Cry, functioned and wanted the game to follow the early 2000s industry trends. The game's producer hated the first game's Dante and his personality and demanded an older and more taciturn version of him. The dialogue was being fixed long after the primary action scenes and sets were already made. The team was being pulled off the project to deal with other Capcom projects, directors were changed, too much emphasis was placed on looks and design over gameplay, changes were made to the premise based on the September 11th attacks, as the game was originally set in New York City, and altogether this game is just a shit show. For some goddamn reason, Capcom marketing also insisted the game partner with Diesel brand clothing and made the game unlockables, being Dante and Lucia modeling the line of clothing from this clothing brand, who I have never heard of before this title and have never heard from again. But I'm not a follower of high fashion. This partnership did not help. This game is perhaps the lowest point and worst selling of the whole series, and it got savaged by critics and still gets lampooned to this day by reviewers. In truth, this game should not exist, and if any game could said to be in desperate need of a remake, then this is the title. However, I am going to say something heretical to the DMC faithful. I really didn't mind just shooting the shit out of everything to get through the game. I was looking for something light and breezy and take my mind off my daily life at the time, and this fit the bill. I didn't have to worry about trying to pull off fighting game combos in a 3D environment or juggle enemies or any of that shit. I just got to storm the game guns blazing, and fuck it if the game was shit. It was a good distraction when one was needed, and that's all it was worth. So I both agree and disagree with Devil May Cry 2's many, many detractors. Yes, this game is a disappointment compared to the previous game, and it is right to be harsh about this game. But since I wasn't expecting much out of a sequel to a practically dripping with Velveeta cheese fest of a game, I got exactly what I expected. An early 2000s digital attempt at a mid-grade Hollywood movie. The equivalent of a direct-to-video sequel to a box office flop. Sorry, folks, but we got what we deserved with Devil May Cry 2. By comparison, however, 2005's Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening was a severe overcorrection in regards to Devil May Cry 2. This game is a much younger Dante's first outing as a professional demon hunter and takes place entirely within the Tenman Ni Gru Tower, an enchanted tower that suddenly erupts from the center of the city in which Dante is living, at the top of which sits Dante's brother Virgil, who intends to open a portal to the demon realm. This game is fucking hard by comparison. What do I mean? The game relies entirely on twitch reflex combo making skills, the kind one might expect out of a high level competitive fighting game player. The guns are less powerful, the enemies are damage sponges, and the Devil Trigger mode is less powerful. And the game requires you to master and switch between, at will, its four primary combat styles: Trickster, Swordmaster, Gunslinger, and Royal Guard. Trickster is all about dodging, Swordmaster is flashy melee attacks, Gunslinger is precision damaging shots, and Royal Guard turns you into a Kung Fu master for repelling attacks and storing their energy for later reprisal. The game returns to relying on combinations of ranged and physical attacks for success, and that's great if you have the reflexes of a 12-year-old. However, I was in my late 20s playing this, and after years of hard labor factory and warehouse work, I no longer had those reflexes in my hands. As far as plot, this game starts when a young Dante is attacked by demons on his business and then is attacked by a character the game later comes to know as Lady, who is a competing demon hunter and has been hired to kill Dante for his half-demon nature. Repelling the attack, a massive edifice explodes out of the center of town, spilling forth evil, and the man responsible calls himself Arkham, who invites Dante to the tower to meet with him and his brother Virgil. Dante and Lady fight the demons and each other all the way up the tower. Dante is defeated by Virgil, and his blood unlocks his latent demon powers, and he pursues Virgil all the way back down the tower. Things happen, and Virgil and Dante break the tower's spell, and Virgil disappears. Dante then fights back up the tower to stop Arkham, fights Lady as well, and eventually defeats Arkham before he uses the power of Sparta to become a demon himself. Dante and Lady decide to team up, and Virgil is seen entering the demon world to fight Mundus, his father's old enemy. If anything, this game has even less plot than the first title, but holy shit does it have spectacle by the bucketful. Devil May Cry 3 is all about flash over any sort of substance, but the developers did pull it off. Dante is back to his old asshole self, and the entire game is a celebration of brash youth and comic book superpowers. Not to say I didn't enjoy a lot of it. The weapons, such as they are pretty cool, including the frost-coated nunchucks and the lightning-based electric guitar were very fun to play around with. And switching between shotgun, rocket launcher, and pistols with rapid-fire ease was a dream to deal with. But overall, I found this game insufferable, from production to characters to setting to gameplay. I only ever beat it once, mostly as a personal challenge to myself, because I'd spent hard-earned money on it, and I was going to be goddamned if I was going to let this fucking little prick of a game character get the better of me. But once I was done, I put it on the shelf and never picked it up again. I've played other hard games as time has gone on repeatedly and enjoyed them. It wasn't the difficulty that turned me off. It was everything else about the game. In the words of Peter Griffin, it insists upon itself. Other hard games I have played have had a better premise, or something far more interesting going on than what Devil May Cry 3 was serving up. Yes, I'm quite aware of the acclaim this game received and still garners, but fuck that shit. I was then and still am beyond the point where I think this sort of game, character, or title is cool. I do still like action titles, the occasional action movie and the like, but I want more substance to go with it. Devil May Cry 3 is Flash, and that's all it floats on. 2008's Devil May Cry 4 would be the last title in the series I would play, and I think mostly I wanted to just see the leap from PS2 to Xbox 360 in hardware achievements. This game starts you out with a new devil hunter, Nero, who, after witnessing the old hero Dante kill the head of his religious order, tries to stop him. As one can expect, not all is as it seems, as when the two characters, who look and act so similarly one can be forgiven for mistaking one for the other, Nero realizes he has been working for a demon-infested organization his whole life, and Dante was in the right to kill the leader. Nero has to rescue his girlfriend from Sanctus, the new leader of the order, from being sacrificed to awaken Sparta's powers, and Dante and Trish arrive to destroy the whole place. The player will switch between Nero and Dante throughout the adventure, but by and large the two characters play very similarly, with few differences between them that matter. As the sword of Dante's brother Virgil is involved in some kind of supernatural manner, just, so we have continuity. In any case, the good guys win, the devils are defeated again, and Nero is now Dante's little buddy junior devil hunting team. The game itself began development shortly after Devil May Cry 3 and its success, and was supposed to star Nero the entire way. However, the producer insisted Dante had to be in the game, as they feared the same negative backlash that happened to Metal Gear Solid 2 when Solid Snake started the game, but the team at Konami switched to Raiden for the majority of the title. The difficulty for Devil May Cry 4 was lowered compared to the previous title, and the game looks a lot less muddy and more crisp for the Xbox 360 and HD TV crowd. Nero is played by Johnny Young Bosch, who also voiced one of my all-time favorite anime characters, Vash the Stampede of Trigun, so I was already predisposed to liking him. And this Dante is less of a wise ass, but not as severe as he was portrayed in Devil May Cry 2. So he finally seems like a human being. It sold well for the series and garnered good reviews, but not great reviews. Kind of like one that would be expected of a release of a wrong running game series when not everything has been smooth for its entire multi year development. Devil May Cry 4 is a decent title, but to me it was just more of the same. Same characters, same gothic architecture, same demons, pretty much the same paper thin plot the whole way, and same style of play, if not exact gameplay from game to game. Nothing about it really knocked my socks off, but it wasn't awful. It was demon hunting done in the most bland way possible, and for me, it was my exit point of the series. I felt I'd gotten what I wanted from these titles, and I didn't need to be part of them anymore. I know how there have been other titles in the series. Some mobile games, a reboot named DMC that was harshly criticized at the time, but whose reputation is softening now, like so many games do, and is now considered to be not so bad, maybe even good, but I couldn't give a shit less. And there was a fifth game released in 2019 that, from what I know of it, was a hot boy and hot girl summer meme factory with gameplay elements. So I assume the series is still doing well and will probably keep going for some time with great success, but I certainly won't be there for it. So at this point, I am ready to render my final verdict on the series, or at least as I have played it. It's fine. It has its fans. It's perfectly serviceable third-person action series with high points and extreme low points. And at least it got the low points out of the way early and had nowhere to go but up. It is yet another video game from an action film series filled with familiar characters and warm feelings, sort of like The Expendables or John Wick or Fast and Furious. The good news is it's a Capcom product, who are specialists in maintaining multiple long ongoing series and have been able to produce routine quality products for most of them. I don't have any problem with the Devil May Cry series, but I think I played more of them than I should have. I should have stopped after the second one, but here we are. I think in retrospect, way back in 2001, that guy I loaned my copy of the first Devil May Cry to was right, in a way. You sure aren't shit without the devil trigger. But the series has so far underperformed and overcorrected, trying to find that balance where you are something outside of the hidden nature of Dante, the series protagonist, and until the fourth game, the sole recurring protagonist of any quality. Has it finally done that? I honestly don't know. It was certainly bland by the time I exited the series, so perhaps that is proof that it has achieved the balance it so desperately needed. Being a middling product is a victory in a way. Overall, though, I had a fine and lively time with the series. Capcom does do good work, usually. But like a lot of long running series of games and studios with multiple products, I just don't think this series is for me anymore. I wish Capcom continued success with games, and a rising tide lifts all boats. Money made from this game series benefits other Capcom games I do care about. And if you continue to enjoy the series, awesome. There's a lot to like here if this sort of game is for you. I think, though, that perhaps old devils don't cry or fade away. They just get bored with the repetition and wander off, seeking new thrills and new territory to explore. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mass Llama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves Podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.